The infamous Amiga CD32, the first CD-ROM-based console to be promoted as 32-bit in the West. While mostly remembered as a cautionary commercial failure today, beyond its wild amount of missteps, this CD32 has at least one highly amusing win under its belt. So today we're going to celebrate such a story and look at the time that Commodore humbled the dominant Sega brand. So without further ado, I am Later Decade, and this is the time that the Amiga CD32 utterly humiliated Sega. The year is 1993, and the epic console war is in full swing between Sega and Nintendo. This 16-bit battle for the ages would, of course, attract many challengers to attempt to knock these two companies from their pedestal. One of the pieces of hardware designed to compete with the best was, of course, the Amiga CD32. Manufacturer Commodore International, who had a wealth of experience producing home computers, would create the CD32 to join their Amiga product family. Functioning primarily as a game console as opposed to a personal computer like most of their other machines. Released in Europe, Australia, Canada and Brazil, the unfortunate bankruptcy of Commodore International in April 1994 caused the CD32 to be discontinued only 8 months after its debut. But before that, there was a point in time, particularly in the United Kingdom, where the CD32 was being positioned as a very appealing product. A product that was so appealing, the majority of consumers in the country would pick the Amiga console over the Sega Mega CD, the CD-ROM-based peripheral that was manufactured as a console add-on to be attached to the Sega Mega Drive, the most popular game console in the entire country. Which probably begs the question, how? Well, to understand how such a sales feat was achieved, we need to look to CBM UK, an acronym for Commodore Business Machines United Kingdom, who would be tasked with launching the Amiga CD32 in the region. In the book Commodore, The Inside Story, written by former Commodore UK Managing Director David Pleasance, he documents the infamous launch of the Amiga CD32 hardware, including how the maligned machine triumphed over Sega's offerings. So, using such a source, let's discuss what would go down in more detail. Pleasance describes the planned UK launch of the CD32 as the most professional and well thought out roadmap of any of the company's previous product releases, certainly within his 12 years plus working there. This was due to several different factors, including building strong relationships with developers, which would include showing them support against hacking and copying those floppies. He adds, "We had gained the trust of these major developers, and so when the time came, we sent them all early CD32 development kits, for which they signed non-disclosure agreements. Soon, they were secretly developing brand new titles to take advantage of the additional power and features the CD32 boasted, so that on the day of launch, there would be, for the first time ever, a plethora of titles that really showed off the product's capabilities." What made this entire process appear all the smoother was that Pleasance felt this meant they had provided developers with a more than adequate amount of time to ensure that multiple dedicated games were being produced for the device that would not only be perfect but also ready for launch in the summer of 1994. During this time frame, David documents that everything was coming up Milhouse for Commodore UK, including on the home computer side of things. In fact, he states they had huge orders in place for their Amiga 1200 computer, describing it as a profitable product with a healthy margin for Commodore at both their corporate head office and in the UK. So, with things going swimmingly on my side of the pond, what could possibly go wrong from here? Well, Pleasance brings up a man known as Mehdi Ali, a man who elsewhere in the book is explained to have been made the president of Commodore in its entirety. Ali was first brought into the company due to working as managing director of a restructuring division at Dillon Reed Company. He would be brought into Commodore to assist with restructuring, ultimately being appointed to his high position of power. Ali, with zero background in working with computers or game consoles either for that matter, would decide to bring the release of the CD32 forward, a decision that Pleasance states he was troubled over, with him warning his boss against the move. According to Pleasance, Ali believed that if they rushed the CD32 launch, both the console and the Amiga 1200 would sell well, and then Commodore would reap the rewards of sales of both products, bringing in much needed cash flow and additional revenues over the Christmas period. David, on the other hand, believed this to be complete poppycock, predicting that if they announced the CD32 early, customers would opt to cancel their plans to purchase Amiga 1200, and equally as importantly, none of those games that were currently in development to launch with the system would be ready to show off what the Amiga CD32 could do either. However, putting these cases forward was not enough to put Mediale off launching the system prematurely, so all hope in making the CD32 a success would need to come down to extremely strong marketing designed to give consumers a reason to purchase such a system over the fierce competition. So let's look back at where this tale gets juicier. Reflecting back, Pleasance believes he worked with an amazing team which had a great marketing department led by a gentleman named Dave Levac. A decision would quickly be made to showcase their cutting-edge system at the Science Museum based in London, where they would book the space to host a launch event. Existing as the first ever 32-bit game console with a CD drive in the West, they would choose the slogan, "16 will never be the same again." Not only did this wording poke fun at Sega and Nintendo's 16-bit offerings, but it also tied in nicely with the event date, which was the 16th of July 1993. Further hype and razzmatazz would be drawn from the fact that they would book Chris Evans to host the event, at the time, huge star and household name in the UK, who hosted the groundbreaking Big Breakfast on Channel 4. This revolutionary show opted to deliver a lighter style of morning content, concentrating mainly on entertainment and humour, with news bulletins restricted to summaries every 20 minutes. This was a stark contrast to the more mature shows, such as GMTV on competing networks. The Big Breakfast delivered memorable television, successfully capturing the zeitgeist of the period. Today, the Nerdy Evans is remembered as one of the most popular presenters and radio hosts of all time. Still, he was white hot in 1993, so through their PR company, Commodore UK couldn't have found someone more appropriate to help highlight their product. But from here, the Amiga CD32 launch would get even more interesting. What would unfold next in planning the CD32 launch? Pleasance would put down to being very, very lucky and being in the right place at the right time to capitalise. Just 3 weeks before the launch, an incident would occur that would give Commodore UK all the ammunition they needed to make their product sound like it was the coolest console that had ever existed. Now, what I'm referring to is something that was said by Tom Kalinske, you know, the same Tom Kalinske who was president of Sega of America at the time, who is often credited with leading his brand and assisting Sega in making the Genesis a hugely successful console in North America. In an interview in a computer magazine with Tom Kalinske, according to Pleasance, he was asked about 32-bit CD-based consoles, to which he replied with words to the effect of, "No way, it cannot be done. If somebody can do it, we at Sega would have done it, but we haven't." Effectively admitting that Commodore must have a superior expertise to Sega. Pleasance adds, "This was music to our ears. At the launch in the Science Museum, we had a professional voice announcer read aloud the quote from Tom Kalinske, at which point we opened curtains to reveal the CD32 in all its glory, gloating from our announcement that it would be available to buy in shops in the UK in September, ready for Christmas. The launch was sensational and incredibly well received, and we got a long-standing ovation from the retailers, journalists and software developers who had filled the venue to capacity." So with marketing like this, you can see why the Amiga CD32 was drumming up appeal. But amazingly, things would only get better next. After an extremely slick launch day event successfully took place, a few weeks on from that fateful day, Pleasance received a phone call from a mysterious individual. It would transpire that the mystery man had access to 96 large poster billboards around prime locations throughout London. Still, to make this all the sweeter, they could be offered to Commodore all at half price, thanks to a previous client already paying a 50% deposit deposit before cancelling their orders. As excellent an opportunity as all of this was still not even the best part, as Mr. Pleasance would soon learn from the caller that one of the billboards was located directly outside of Sega UK's head office. This was all the information Pleasance needed to make the booking immediately. Throughout the console wars in North America, you were probably more than aware of the famous marketing slogan from the era of "Genesis does what Nintendo don't," a slogan that was never used in the UK, as apart from the system being called the Sega Mega Drive here, like it was everywhere else, Nintendo home consoles had never been the most popular on the market, so therefore there was absolutely no reason for Sega to mention Nintendo in their UK advertising whatsoever. Instead, here in the UK, the Sega slogan of the era was, "To be this good takes ages. To be this good takes Sega." Working with their advertising agency, Commodore UK would opt to mock this tagline, putting an all-new spin on it to promote the might of the Amiga CD32. So a huge billboard would go up outside of Sega's head office, featuring an image of the Amiga CD32 with the simple slogan, "To be this good will take Sega ages." A gag that once again poked fun at Tom Kalinski's admission that Sega was not capable of producing a 32-bit CD-ROM based console at the time. Absolute genius! This poster was shown in gaming magazines all over the world, and to give you an idea of its impact, it is regularly still shared on the internet to this very day. In fact, there is a strong likelihood that you may have seen this poster even if you have never played a CD32. The image is simply that notorious. Perhaps what you may not be aware of, though, is that shortly after this poster went up, David Pleasance would meet the Sega of Europe CEO Nick Alexander in person at the UK's annual industry dinner. The Sega CEO could not resist bringing up the controversial poster, walking up to the Commodore man and saying, "A bit close to home, Mr. Pleasance, a bit close to home." David simply replied, "Where needs must, Mr. Alexander, where needs must." The pair never spoke about the incident to each other again. All of this resulted in the perfect storm for the birth of the Amiga CD32 in the region, with the Amiga Report International online magazine reporting in their news section in the past that in the Christmas period following its launch, the CD32 accounted for 38% of all CD-ROM drive sales in the UK, exceeding sales of the Mega CD. However, the console was discontinued as Commodore went into bankruptcy. David Pleasance in his book also adds that, just as he predicted, the platform's launch did in fact have negative effects on sales of the Amiga 1200 computer. Consumers who had planned to buy the A1200 were confused into thinking the CD32 must be considerably better, when in reality it was just different. It was not a computer in its basic form. It needed a keyboard and other peripheral add-ons to offer the same functionality as the Amiga 1200. Plus, the only games available were ports of existing Amiga 1200 titles that were not specifically written to take advantage of the CD32's superior architecture. The whole outcome was, in a word, disappointing. Everything else may have eventually gone wrong for the crumbling Commodore, but one thing is for sure: there was a time when Commodore humiliated Sega and the Amiga CD32 destroyed the Sega Mega CD in the UK one Christmas. Always remember, to be this good will take Sega ages.